Welcome to The Explainer. So today we are digging into one of those famous bits of pop culture wisdom that the deadly poison cyanide smells just like almonds. We've all heard it, right? In movies and mystery novels, but is it actually true? We're about to find out, and let me tell you, the answer is way more complex and frankly, a lot more dangerous than you'd think.
Okay, let's just dive right into the big question. It seems a little weird, doesn't it? That one of the world's most famous poisons would have this pleasant, nutty, food-like smell. You'd think most toxic things would have some kind of harsh, warning smell, but almonds? That almost sounds like an invitation. So, to get to the bottom of this, the chemist in our source material did something most of us would definitely not do. He decided to smell cyanide for himself.
The investigation kicks off with the real deal, pure hydrogen cyanide gas. Now, it's really important to note that the solid form, like sodium cyanide, is pretty much odorless, kind of like table salt. The infamous scent we always hear about is linked to the gas, which is incredibly dangerous. So a very carefully controlled experiment was set up to produce just enough of it to smell safely. And this table right here really drives home just how lethal this stuff is. At around 300 parts per million, death is immediate. So to avoid, any permanent side effects, the experiment was done at a super low concentration of about 15 parts per million. At that level, the actual smell test, which only lasted a few seconds, was perfectly safe. And boom, here it is, the first big surprise. After taking a very careful whiff from the test chamber, the chemist's immediate reaction was, it smells nothing like almonds, not at all. There was no sweet, nutty, food-like scent. The smell was something else entirely.
So if not almonds, then what did it smell like? Well, the description was consistently industrial. I mean, think about it. Weak bleach, or that sharp chemical smell you get at an indoor pool when there's just a little too much chlorine in the air. It was an unpleasant, artificial odor that you would never, ever mistake for something you'd want to eat.
So this result, which is pretty surprising, right? It raises a whole new question. If cyanide doesn't smell like almonds, maybe the problem isn't the cyanide, maybe it's the almonds. It was time to investigate the supposed source of the scent itself. So the focus shifted to the almonds you and I would find at the grocery store, regular sweet almonds. They were tested whole, then they were crushed up to release more of their scent, and finally mixed with water just to see if that changed anything. And the result? Well, turns out sweet almonds, they barely smell like anything at all. Even after being crushed and mixed with water, all they got was this faint scent described as really bad almond milk. So the common, edible, sweet almond is definitely not where this legendary cyanide smell comes from. And it turns out, there's a really good reason for this. There are actually two main kinds of almonds. The ones we all eat are sweet almonds. But they have this toxic cousin, the bitter almond, which is almost never eaten raw because it contains a precursor to cyanide. This is where the myth really begins.
Alright, so with the sweet almond off the table, the investigation zeroes in on the real culprit, the bitter almond. Now these are much harder to find, but they are known to contain the compounds you need to produce both that almond scent and cyanide gas.
Okay, so here's where the chemistry gets really interesting. Bitter almonds have this compound called amygdalin. On its own, it's pretty harmless. But the moment you crush the almond and add water, enzymes inside get to work and break the amygdalin down, releasing two things. Benzaldehyde, which is what actually creates the almond scent, and the super toxic hydrogen cyanide gas.
So yeah, it's a pretty simple chemical reaction, all natural. All you have to do is damage the almond structure, crush it, and add some water. That little process kicks off a chain reaction that produces both the scent molecule and the poison molecule at the exact same time. So, before even smelling them, the chemist actually tasted a tiny, tiny piece of one. And the reaction? Oh, it was immediate. It was incredibly bitter, had a hint of cherry, and was just completely unpleasant. There is absolutely no way you could ever mistake this for a regular sweet almond. So, they set up the exact same controlled experiment again. This time, a single bitter almond was crushed up in the chamber with some water, and the gas it let off was monitored until it reached that same safe concentration of about 14 parts per million. And what was the verdict? Well, the gas coming off that bitter almond, it smelled exactly like the pure hydrogen cyanide from the first test. The main scent was that same chemical chlorine-like smell. Sure, there was a very faint hint of cherry from that benzaldehyde, but it was totally overpowered by the smell of cyanide. It did not smell like what we think of as almonds. Now you might be thinking, well,
maybe that's just one person's nose, right? So, to be sure, 2 other people were brought in to smell the gas from the bitter almond, and their descriptions were perfectly consistent. One said it smelled like a pool towel that you forgot to wash, and the other said it was a stronger smell of chlorine. Not a single one of them said almonds.
Okay, so here we are. The verdict is in. While the saying is technically connected to the bitter almond, what this all reveals is why it's a deeply misleading and, let's be honest, a really dangerous piece of common knowledge.
And here's why this is so important. This whole myth sets you up with a totally false expectation. You're told to be on the lookout for a pleasant, sweet, nutty smell, kind of like almond cookies. But the reality is a harsh, industrial smell, like a chlorinated pool. If you were ever in a dangerous situation, you'd be looking for completely the wrong clue. But wait, it gets even crazier. Here is the single most critical and honestly shocking fact of this whole thing. According to scientific sources, a huge chunk of the population, some estimates say up to 50%, is genetically incapable of smelling cyanide at all. For half of us, it has no smell, even at lethal levels.
So when you put all of this together, you start to see why this myth is just so incredibly dangerous. It makes you expect the wrong smell. Even if you can smell it, you probably wouldn't recognize it correctly. And then, on top of all that, there's a good chance you can't even smell it in the first place. Relying on this piece of wisdom is worse than having no information at all. It gives you a totally false sense of security.
Look, the big takeaway here isn't really just about cyanide. It's about questioning the things we just accept as fact, especially the stuff passed down through pop culture. Because sometimes what everyone knows isn't just wrong, it could be deadly. It really makes you wonder what other bits of common knowledge might be leading us astray.